Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's great books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 200 of the great books over the next 10 years and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each of the great books. Today I'm going to cover Theo of Golden by Alan Levi. This is a novel, and it's book 37 for my 2024 reading list. Well, first off, I'm going to try my best to stay away from spoilers. I really want you to read this book, and so I'm going to keep the topics just along the lines of what you would find on the back of the book by reading the blurb. So this is a book that I had a hard time putting down. I finished it late last night, and I read it within 4 days. The main character, Theo, is a good man, a man that you want to emulate. And I've been thinking about Theo a lot. I've been thinking about this book a lot, especially since completing it. And I think about Hallmark movies where sometimes the character is so good and they're so cheesy that we all have these radars that just say, okay, there's no one like that. No one can possibly live like that. They're so good that it's just not even believable. But I have come across a few characters in literature where they are a good character, but they are believable, and they're on a level where you think it might be possible for yourself. Like you're reading the book and you're thinking, I want to be like this person. And I thought about that, and that doesn't happen for me a lot in literature. I mean, just take some of the most popular books out there, Crime and Punishment. Like, you do not want to be the main character of that book. He attempts to murder somebody because he thinks he can get away with it from the law. He's curious if he can get away with it in his head and be able to look at himself in the mirror. But I don't want to emulate him. The Iliad, there's some great characters. There's some great aspects of different characters, but there's not a character in the Iliad that I want to emulate, or I look at their life and like every piece of their life, I'm like, man, I want that. I want to be like that person. But in this book, Theo, the whole mode of this person's life, I want to emulate it. And it shows what's possible in a life. It shows a life well lived. It shows a life that is worthy of emulation, and it is so intoxicating. And I don't come across this often. In fact, I can think of a couple other books where there is a main character where you just think, I want to be like that person. And those would be like Sir Gibbie by George MacDonald or Jayber by Wendell Berry. And so this is a story about a good man, but a believable man, and not a man without flaws. This is not some cheesy good man that you see in some films. This is a real good man. This is a man who has suffered. This is a man who has known pain and loss, feels comfortable around others who are going through pain and loss, but there's a goodness about him. And so that's what I want to talk about in this episode. I want to talk about what goes into that, and how is this man like that? And so let's just start off with the title of the book itself. We've got Theo of Golden, and Theo is an 86-year-old widower, and he was born in Portugal, and he winds up in this town called Golden, and so that's the end of the part of the title of the book there. And Golden is a fictional small town in Georgia. It reminds me a lot of where I live in Franklin, Tennessee, where it's just this kind of beloved small town. You've got this small town atmosphere. You've got the local coffee shop. You've got a musician that plays on the street. You've got all these different, like I'm reading this book and I'm thinking about actual people that I see in Franklin. And so that's where the story takes place. Theo is just fully invested in the art of living. He lives well, and he's arrived in Golden. He's at 86 years old, and he starts frequenting this coffee shop. And in this coffee shop there's portraits throughout this coffee shop. There's 92 of them. And he's so struck by these portraits, he decides that what he wants to do is start a project of sorts where he buys a portrait and gives it to the person who is the object of the portrait. So each portrait is of a person in that town, and so he wants to buy each portrait and then give it to the person whose portrait it is of. And so there's a local author a local artist who has done all these portraits, and Theo here is going to buy them. And so what he ends up doing is just meeting a variety of people in this community by taking on this project, by purchasing the portraits and then giving them to these people. So he gets to hear their stories, but Theo just has an eye for art as well, and he has an eye to look at the portrait and study it, and he sees things in these people that they don't even see in themselves. And he picks those things out, and he mentions those to those people, and they're good things. They're good things that he wants to call out. But there's a sadness in each of the portraits as well, and it just makes for this interesting concept, this interesting idea, this interesting way for this newcomer to Golden to get to know people in that town. Now, I've told you two of the words of the title. The third word, though, I think is the most interesting word choice in the title, because it's Theo of Golden. But Theo is 86 years old, and he has just moved to Golden, so he's not really of Golden. But that's one of the beautiful things of this title, and it's one of the things that just makes you ponder. Why is the title is that he is of Golden? What does that mean? And as you read through the story, you get a glimpse of it. But it's one of those things I'm still pondering. Like, what a fascinating word choice to tie Theo in Golden. It could have easily have been Theo in Golden, because he is in Golden as we read this novel. But there's something deeper going on, and I love that word choice. And it's one that after you read this book, you'll understand a little more of why it's Theo of Golden. Well, this book was gifted to me by a publisher friend of mine here in Franklin, Tennessee, and she gave me the book, and she said that I had to read it. And then she told me that she had read it and then read it 4 times after that in a row, like just read it 5 times straight. I've never heard of anyone doing that, much less a publisher who is inundated with books their entire life to take the time amidst reading books for clients and all that, for her to take the time to read this book 5 times in a row. It just made me think, like, who does that? And is the book that good that somebody would read it 5 times in a row? And I also heard from other people who had read this book, and they said similar things, whether it was, I read it or my husband read it and the husband cried at reading it. Like, I just heard all these different stories from different people telling me about the book. And so I just decided, it's my break month, December here. I'm going to read it, and I'm so glad I did. And I think, just even in preparation for this podcast episode, I think I'm going to read it again this month. I'm going to try to read it again at the end of December. Upon finishing this book, it's one of those where you're like, wow, I need to read this again. And now that I kind of know the story, just really pay attention to different aspects of it. The author is Alan Levi, and he lives in Georgia, a small town in Georgia. He studied in Edinburgh in 1990. Alan is a lawyer, and he was a lawyer for many years, and then he took 2 years to move to Scotland and to study literature. He's a big fan of George MacDonald, and so he obtained a Master's of English Literature while in Edinburgh, and then came back to the States, worked in law a little bit more, but is also a singer-songwriter. And so he travels around and shares his songs. And this is his first novel. He wrote a book, one other book before this, about his brother who passed away, and just this incredible life of his brother. But this is his first novel. And I just love that. Like, what a storied life, what an interesting life. And then, this is not a typical first novel. Like, this thing is amazing. And I just think that is so cool about this man, Alan Levi. I reached out to him earlier this year, and I'm attempting to get him to the bookstore where I'm the business manager here in Franklin, Tennessee. I'd love to have him in for an event and just hear more about this book. So I hope that it sounds like that might be something that could occur here next year, 2025. So for stats for this book, I read it between December 1st and 4th of this year. It's a 394-page book, and it took me 9 hours and 13 minutes to read it. Again, that was over 4 days. I really had a hard time putting it down. Stayed up quite late last night to finish this book. Before I read this, somebody told me that every word in this book is supposed to be there. It's one of those books. There's not wasted words. And while I was reading it, I didn't really understand what they meant until I got to the end of the book, and then it made sense. It's a puzzle. Like you're putting pieces together the whole time you're reading this book, but you have to pay attention. There are not wasted words. There are not wasted characters. You're not just meeting a character for the heck of it. The name of a character will show up later, and the way that everyone is connected, everything is connected, and through the life of Theo is utterly, it's brilliant. It's the word I used after finishing it was this is a stunning work. 2 more segments for the remainder of this episode. The next segment, I want to cover a few of my favorite things in this book. And then the last segment, I want to cover the one thing that stuck out to me the most in Theo of Golden by Alan Levi. Well, in the first segment, I mentioned that this whole all the action in the book is based upon a project of sorts, an idea that was sparked in Theo's head to buy these portraits and then give them to the people in that community. And I loved that. And in the start of chapter 8, there was this comment: his silly idea began to solidify in his mind as a calling, a mission. And I love that. It was this silly idea, this thing that he just took on. And he took it on one piece at a time, one step at a time. It wasn't this grand overarching plan that had a million components and just you look at it and it's like, well, I could never do that. It was just this simple idea of purchasing portraits, giving them to the people and meeting the people while he's giving them and talking to them and getting to know them. And I loved that. I loved that this was a project of sorts. It turned it more approachable as opposed to, this great man who did so much for the community, and you see all the ripple effects throughout this book. But it started with what is called a silly idea there. I just thought that was so brilliant. There's another part where it talks about Theo and not being able to sleep at night, and how he wouldn't fight that, but he would allow things to happen. And I want to read this paragraph and then kind of what I was thinking about it. He never knew, when he was alone like this, whose face from childhood, which town from adulthood, which agony or ecstasy from his past, or which hope for the future would assert itself in his thoughts. Invariably, the susurrs of the fountain and the calmness of night would lull him back, unresisting, into dreams. End quote. And I just loved this description of meandering thoughts. And it's something I've experienced. I don't experience it as much as I did in the past, but there was a period where I would play, I'm a violinist, and I would play violin in different restaurants and bars across Atlanta. And when I would do that, I would just get into this zone. I knew the songs. I didn't have to think about the songs I was playing. And for like 2 hours, I would just get in this zone where all these memories would just flood into my head, almost like an exact description of what I just read. And I couldn't control them. I couldn't like conjure them up or something, but it was just fascinating to see what would come to my mind. It might be a memory from childhood or from adolescence, from high school, from college. They would just flood back, and it was beautiful. I loved it. They were mostly good memories, and it was just fun because it would be things that I hadn't thought about for a while. And so just reading that part of the book just made me think of that. Another thing, and I wrote this in the very back of the book as I was reading about the portraits and what he was doing with the portraits, because when he would buy these portraits, he would study them, and then he would talk to the people and point out what he noticed about about them through the portraits. And so here's what I wrote in the back of the book. Don't we all want to be known like this? For someone to look and see the best in us, to have characteristics be so obvious that we don't see them, but others can see them even in a portrait. And that's the end of what I wrote there. But just this idea, it was so beautiful. Like just the idea at first of him buying portraits, it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. But the more he described it and the more he almost was able to view into the person's soul. And then you just think about that and like how much we get to know somebody through their face, through their eyes. There's even a part of this book where it's talking, it's for a newborn child, the first thing they're looking at is a face. They're looking for faces, and just how elemental, how important that is for people, and how we often forget that, but just being reminded of that in this book. Last thing I want to talk about is another just beautiful paragraph, and so I just want to read it and then maybe comment on it. Well, it is subtle, and maybe it takes an old man, an expert in sadness, to see it, but it is there in every portrait, in some more than others. It is not gloomy or angry or even terribly obvious. It is like a weariness or an unmet longing or a disappointment, something we inherit from those who lived before us. But to these old eyes, it is in every face, the universal affliction. It is what gives such gravitas to your portraits and makes them so believable. Even when your subjects are smiling, the shadow of sadness is there. And so far, my meetings at the Fetter only confirm my suspicion." End quote. I loved that. That was Theo talking to Asher, the artist, and just how the portraits, even if the person was smiling, there was a universal affliction that afflicted every single person, and this affliction of sadness. There was some tragedy or something that could be seen in these portraits, could be seen in the faces, even amidst a smile. And it's almost like Theo had insight into each of these people based on these portraits before ever meeting them, and just knowing that there was a sadness there, and even being able to call it out on occasion, but to know that, but I loved that it was the universal affliction. It was something that we all have, some sort of a sadness, even amidst the joy. And that's one thing that just made this book so beautiful is it was so real. There was pain and trauma and hurt and suffering, yet there was beauty amidst that. There was truth. There was goodness. There were things that elevated. There were things that as the reader you want to do. You want to live this kind of a life as well. So those were some of the main things that stuck out to me and that were favorites in this book. In the next segment, I'll cover the one thing. On page 217, it says this: Theo continued, "I would guess you've read Mr. Wordsworth, perhaps in a literature class at some point in your studies. He once wrote that the best portion of a good person's life is the little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. Tintern Abbey, yes? Little, nameless, unremembered. I think it has never been our nature to think that way, but especially now we like big and viral and all that. But I think Mr. Wordsworth was right." End quote. That perfectly encapsulates this book, and it encapsulates Theo. That's what made this book and his goodness so real and worthy of emulation. It wasn't some big, grand idea or strategy he had to make friends or influence people in this new town or make his name known, but it was his attempt to do these little, nameless, unremembered acts, and to do them in such a way that they were secretive. People wouldn't know. And part of the beauty of this book is that we as the readers get to see parts that Theo doesn't get to see. We get to see what happens on a larger scale of his project, of these little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love that he does. And we see the impact in other people's lives. We see the impact in Theo's life. We see joy and happiness that results from this. But we also see lives transformed by these simple acts. We see people suffering who suffer less or make changes in their lives based upon the kindness of this man. And that's what made this book approachable. That's what made this book real. That's what made the goodness of Theo real. It wasn't this huge thing he was trying to do. It was just this daily, little nameless, unremembered acts that he was doing. It's funny. For this reading project, I've read some self-help books out there, some of the most popular ones, but it's books like these that are ones that actually help you and actually give you a direction and something to emulate. And I love that. I loved this book. If you read it, I do suggest keeping a list of characters that will help you just understand. And then especially as things the puzzle pieces come together, you'll be able to look back at that list. I think if I read it again, I'll just mark every person's name in the back of the book and then just write a few things about them. One thing that was just absolutely delightful in this book is I have a friend from college who is a friend of Alan's, and so I saw his name pop up in this book, and that was so neat to see that. I want to close with one comment, one statement from this book. For anything to be good, truly good, there must be love in it. And there is definitely love in this book. You can tell the author, Alan Levi, put love into this book. And it is truly good. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I do hope you read this book. Buy it from Alan. Buy it from his website, alanlevi.com. He has different options for the book. There are you can get a signed copy. You can even get something that you'll come across in the title of the book, or not in the title, but in the actual book. And you can buy that along with the book on his website as well. If you do read it, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you thought. Let me know if you cried. That's kind of a gauge I have. I got very close in this one to crying. I would there's just some beautiful parts in this book. Well, as always, if you get value out of this podcast, I would love if you return that value. I am on Substack. You can give $5 a month, $99 a year, or $500 a year. Thank you to those who do give. That means so much, and it helps me cover some of the costs that come up with this project. I also want to give a little teaser here quickly about something I'm planning to do in 2025, and that's to do a monthly reading group. I want to just do one meeting per month, and 2025, the theme will be short, great books. So things like the Epic of Gilgamesh or some of the Greek tragedies, and I'll share that list soon. So I'll pick 12 different books, and then we'll do one a month, and we'll do it in person and online. So if you live near Franklin, Tennessee, in the Nashville area, I would love for you to participate. It is so fun to get together and do that. But I'm also going to have an online option separate from the in-person meeting. So we're not just recording that or you're not just joining in that, but it'd be a separate online thing where we'll meet at some point once a month to discuss these short, great books. So I'll have more details on how you can get involved, how you can sign up, and all that coming up. And I'll release the full list of books coming up. So keep an eye out for that. If you are not subscribed on Substack, you don't have to pay, but you just put in your email address, and that's where I'll be announcing that. So keep an eye out for that. I'm currently in my winter break. So each year I spend 8 months reading the great books. I spend 2 months reading straight through the Bible to kick off the year. And then I've got a break month in July and a break month in December where I just pick up books on my to-be-read pile. So Theo of Golden was one of those books on my winter winter reading list pile. The one I'm reading now, I started this morning. It's called The Art of Teaching, and that was a book suggested to me by a good friend here in Franklin, Tennessee. And so I'm reading that one now, and then I've got some other books on the list for this month. Then starting in January 1st, I'll kick off with the King James version of the Bible this year. So that should be fun. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you. Please comment on Substack for this podcast episode. That allows other people to see your comments and then comment on your comments as well. We get a nice discussion going there. If you want to reach out to me directly, please email me at Eric, E-R-I-K, at booksoftitans.com. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and I've got a website. I've got the Substack, which is booksoftitans.com. I also have a website that lists all of my reading lists, my great book reading list. Every book I've read, I've got a review, notes, and that kind of thing. So that's at books.booksoftitans.com. I will be back next week discussing another book from this year's reading list. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.